Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Graduate Town Hall. Whether you're tuning in from home here in Providence or anywhere else around the world, thank you for taking the time to join us for this important discussion. My name is Olubenga Joseph, and I'm Assistant to the President for Special Projects. In this capacity, I work with President Paxton around student engagement, including, of course, graduate students. Now, before beginning, I wanted to lay down a couple important ground rules, as well as provide a scope and sequence of events. First things first, this event is live and is being recorded, and we have captioning available. Second, in terms of our agenda, we'll begin shortly with remarks from Kathryn Thompson and Malcolm Thompson, your President and Vice President of the Graduate Council of Students. Following that, we will hear some remarks from President Paxton, and then to conclude, we'll have an extended Q&A session with our panel of Brown administrators who will join us later in this discussion. Now, should you have any questions at any point during the town hall, you're not only welcome, but encouraged to use the chat function to submit those questions. We'll do our best to cover as many questions during Q&A as our allotted time will allow. And now to commence our town hall, I'd like to turn it over to GSC President Kathryn Thompson and GSC Vice President Malcolm Thompson to deliver some remarks.
Thank you, Olubenga. Good evening, students, faculty, staff, alumni, and friends. In collaboration with the Brown University President's Office, the Graduate Student Council would like to welcome you to the GSC Graduate Student Town Hall. My name is Kathryn Thompson, and I'm a third-year PhD student in Health Services Research in the School of Public Health. This year, I am serving as the GSC President and will be serving as one of the two moderators for tonight's event. The second moderator will be Malcolm Thompson.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Malcolm Thompson. I'm a second-year PhD student in Africana Studies. This year, I'm serving as the GSC Vice President of Advocacy, and I'll also be moderating tonight's event.
For those who are not familiar with GSC, the Graduate Student Council, or GSC as most people know us, of Brown University is the student government organization for Brown's graduate student community of approximately 2,800 members. Our primary aims are to foster a sense of community among graduate students across departments, to facilitate collective action on graduate student-related issues, and to be a voice for the graduate community within the university and the Providence area. We also provide events and resources to support the academic and social lives of Brown graduate students, very much like this town hall. Our duties and responsibilities are expansive and exist within the graduate community itself, between graduate students and the university, and bridge Brown graduates to the greater Providence community. These responsibilities are ever so important throughout the calendar year, but especially during the challenging times of the pandemic. As we complete the semester, embark on a new academic term, and navigate the challenges introduced by COVID-19, we are excited yet challenged to continue our mission. This semester, we have addressed just a few of the larger items: research and lab safety, graduate student rights and surrounding policies and guidelines, graduate student access to space and resources, inclusion of graduate students on campus-wide committees, addressing food insecurity and financial hardships, and so much more. And as GSC, we will continue and promise to advocate for all information mentioned beforehand, additional exclusive graduate student spaces, increasing graduate representation within departments, enhancing support for graduate students across all centers, and further increasing support for graduate student parents. So now I would like to take time to introduce some remarks from President Paxton.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, and thanks to the GSC for all you've done to organize this event. It's really good that we're having it. I want to begin by recognizing what Kat just referred to, just how difficult the end of the last academic year and the beginning of this academic year has been. As we all know, the pandemic has had just a devastating impact on nearly every aspect of our lives. And I know that as graduate students, you faced a lot of uncertainty. You may have family members or friends who've been sick or lost their jobs. And, we've all missed out on celebrating all of the things in life, holidays and gatherings that are so meaningful. And you've seen challenges in your academic journeys and your research. And I expect we'll talk about some of that later on this evening. And none of this is easy. So, unfortunately, while we got some good news about a vaccine, it does look like we're going to be living with this virus for months to come. And in every decision that we've made throughout this difficult time as a university, we have prioritized public health and safety, and we've supported our academic mission, both of those things. And part of that means providing critical supports for graduate students. And our conversations with all of you have helped us reach some really important decisions. Things like extending graduate fellowships, honoring our research and startup commitments to faculty, many of which then go on to support graduate students, ensuring that all students funded by Brown continue to receive that support regardless of location. These are really important things. You may also have heard that we're scaling back on admissions of new doctoral students so that we can focus on supporting the students who are here, who we already have. And again, hard choice, but something that we thought was important to do. I should note that we're addressing a COVID-19 budget deficit of about $118 million, rather large. And we're doing this, though, in a way that is consistent with our values, and most notably trying successfully so far to avoid laying off any regular Brown employees, something we're all really proud of and that we hope we can continue throughout the course of the pandemic. It looks good now. So I hope that you recognize that what we're doing for graduate students, even in a financially difficult time, just demonstrates how important all of you are to the Brown community. So, where are we at public health at Brown right now? So as many of you know, rates are rising in Rhode Island and in many states around the country. It's very concerning. At Brown, we're seeing some increase in cases, which we're watching very carefully. You can go on dashboard and check it out. But we're still overall in very good shape. Our testing program, which I assume all of you who are here in Providence are regular users of, you should be, is a central piece of our public health program. So we've done since August, I think August 24th, we've done more than 109,000 cases, 109,000 tests, excuse me, and results are returned in most cases in around 24 hours, which is excellent. We have great teams of contact tracers who are working to make sure that when there is a case, we can figure out who else might have been exposed and ask people to go into quarantine. And our positivity rate has increased slightly in recent weeks, but it's still very low. Now, I say that knowing that we're heading into winter. That could make things more challenging. And our continued success has to be a community priority. This is something we all have to work at. And that means we're going to have to continue getting tested. But as important, if not more important, it means we have to follow all of the other public health guidance. Mask wearing, hand washing, social distancing, staying home if you're sick. This community is doing a great job. And I just want to thank all of you for what you're doing and ask you to please just keep up the great work. It's really been spectacular. Now, beyond Brown, I think we're also seeing a lot of headwinds out there. Rising infection rates locally and globally are deeply concerning. However, this isn't the only difficult issue we're facing. As we all know, the pandemic has widened pre-existing disparities in income. It's been particularly difficult for communities of color, people without college degrees, employees in the service sector, women. So the economic crisis that we're in the middle of is not evenly distributed at all. Then on top of this, after the murders of George Floyd and too many others in the wake of, a lot of the things that happened this summer, we're in the midst of a long overdue racial reckoning, which is hard, but I think also presents a lot of opportunities for progress, which is important. We're in the aftermath of a very contentious presidential election. And as part of this, I think we're facing some threats to core democratic institutions and norms and values. And that's important to think about and figure out how to address in the future. And then on top of this, I'm sorry, I'm giving you a lot of bad news. Wildfires that we've seen in the West add to a massive evidence that climate change is a serious threat to the well-being of humans from around the globe. So, these are big challenges. And the reason why I note them here is not to make you feel despondent, but if anything, note that these challenges highlight the need for institutions like Brown that value academic excellence and promote social mobility and advance knowledge in the service of society. These things are more important than ever. The work we're doing here is more important than ever. I am so proud of the way that Brown researchers are stepping up to address these challenges. Folks at our medical school and the School of Public Health are adding to our knowledge of how to address the pandemic. This is in addition to work that Brown medical faculty are doing on the front lines of treating COVID-19 patients, increasingly so in recent weeks. Our economists are doing fantastic work on how the pandemic is impacting the well-being of families and children. Academic centers like the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America and the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice are leading vitally important conversations on the long legacy of slavery and on anti-Black racism, structural racism. The Institute of Brown for Environment and Society and the Watson Institute are considering and really advocating for concrete actions and policy responses to climate change. Now, I could go on, I could probably talk about every department at this university and the great work that it's doing. But the point I want to make here is that the work we do is vitally important. Graduate students are essential partners in this work. And so even though we're in a difficult period, this is a time for all of us to really double down on our efforts and our commitment to advance knowledge and understanding, which is what graduate study is all about. So just a point that I think is important. Now, before I conclude and we go into the Q&A, which is the most, I think the most interesting part of Town Hall, so I'm looking forward to that. I want to touch briefly on 3 topics. Brown's role in policy advocacy and what we're doing in a number of different areas, what we're doing to confront racial injustice, and finally, a conversation that we're just beginning on policing and public safety at Brown, which I hope all of you will be a part of. So first, Brown's role in policy advocacy. And as all of you know, or should know by now, because we've been talking about it a lot, Brown is a nonprofit, nonpartisan institution. That's part of our status of being a not-for-profit. And so we can't engage in political advocacy, and we didn't during this election. But that fact will never stand in the way of Brown's commitment to advocate for what's right in higher education and to advocate on behalf of the Brown community. And that doesn't change regardless of who's in the White House or who's controlling Congress. So it's been true for a long time, and it will continue to be in the future. At our core, we stand against racism and discrimination. We stand against inequity. We stand for the responsible stewardship of the planet. And we stand for policies that support our mission of teaching and research that advances the well-being of our community, the nation, and the world. Now, we know that our community is wonderfully made up of so many different types of individuals, students of color, international students, LGBTQ students, many others who have been marginalized. And to these groups who have frankly been under some attack in recent years, I want you to know that Brown is doing everything we can to protect our community. So just to give you a few examples, recently Brown stood with 24 other academic institutions to try to block new federal visa rules that would harm research and teaching by endangering the status of international workers. So our students who are graduating, many of them graduate students, their ability to stay and work in this country is at risk. We joined an amicus brief on the Harvard admissions case that challenged the use of race as a factor in admissions to colleges and universities, which, if that challenge is successful, it will affect not only undergraduate admissions, but also graduate admissions. And we got the very good news today that the First Circuit upheld the initial ruling in Harvard's favor that affirmed the ability to continue to use race as one of many factors in the admissions of students. We signed a letter not long ago condemning the Department of Education's investigation of Princeton University following a letter that their president, Chris Eisgruber, sent to his community, simply stating Princeton's commitment to addressing racial injustice in the world and on their campus. And so we're standing with them. And we've been very vigorous in our advocacy for greater federal research funding, increased support for Pell Grants and financial aid for graduate students, and other things that are central to our mission. So my point here is that we will continue to fight. You know, it looks like we're heading into a different administration. It doesn't mean that all of this will vanish. There will still be concerns that we have, things that are working through the court system. We're going to continue to fight for our students, fight for what's right, no matter what the political landscape is. So that's a commitment that I give to all of you. The second point that I wanted to note on was the work that Brown is doing in the space of combating racial injustice. And, you know, one of the most pressing issues that we're facing today as a community, as a nation, is systemic racism. And these issues aren't new. They've been around for hundreds of years. But the brutal murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others have brought a justified and renewed focus to the reality that people of color, especially Black people, deal with every day. For many members of our community, these events have been and are extremely difficult to process on a personal level. We appreciate that. We want to make sure that all members of our community have resources available for support. And it's also part of our responsibility as a university to actively address the impacts of systemic racism and ensure that all members of the Brown community are valued and respected. So some of the efforts that are underway, there are many, I'll just name a few. We have a task force that is being co-chaired by Vice President Shontay, who's on this panel tonight, along with Professor Andre Willis, that will be delivering recommendations on what Brown can do to address anti-Black racism in ways that reflect the university's mission of education and scholarship and service. We have a new fund to support research and programming to address anti-Black racism on and beyond Brown's campus. And we've launched a virtual campus conversation series that's led by the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America and the Provost office on the topic of race. The next installment is on race and democracy, a very important topic right now, and that's on December 2nd for those of you who are interested. And more generally, and I'm sure we'll come back to this later in the Q&A, the Provost and the Dean of the Graduate School have made very specific commitments to support Black graduate students and more broadly graduate students of color. And these are things we can all be really proud of. So that's good. The final thing that I just want to mention really briefly is what we're doing on public safety. And I think, as we all know, there's a debate going on all across the country about the role of policing. And Brown is assessing our campus safety policies and practices in light of and informed by this really important discussion. You may have seen an announcement this morning in Today at Brown. If you haven't, pull it out of your email and read it. And basically it says that starting next month, but then following into the spring, we're planning to convene an engagement process to identify ways in which we can improve Brown's approach and ensure that we're being truly inclusive, truly equitable, and supportive of all members of our community in the way that we approach campus safety and security. The Brown University Community Council, which is a council that consists of faculty, students, staff, alumni, corporation member, community members, it's really a great group. The BUCC will be the forum for this process. The next meeting of the BUCC is on November 18th, and that's where we're really going to lay the groundwork for this process and just bring everybody up to speed on what we do now for public safety, and then start the discussion about how we can actually make it even better. So I encourage all interested members of the community to attend that meeting and contribute to the process. I think it'll be important and have a big impact on the Brown community. So in conclusion, what I hope you take away from this very brief update is that we are not just muddling through this year. That wouldn't be true to who we are. We're going to keep pushing forward to tackle issues of consequence. We're going to learn from the moment that we're in. The challenges that we're facing tell us again that the work that's happening at universities is more important than it's ever been. And I think we can take pride in how the Brown community is handling this moment. We're contributing with important research and leading public voices, and the entire community, faculty, staff, and students, including and especially graduate students, are working really hard through this challenging time, and that work deserves to be recognized and valued, and it is. So I just want to conclude by thanking you for your critical role in moving Brown's work forward. You're a vitally important part of it, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm looking forward to hearing and addressing your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, President Paxton, for those remarks, and thank you, Kathryn and Malcolm, for your earlier remarks. And so with the conclusion of these remarks, I'd like to now transition us into the Q&A portion of our town hall. Along with President Paxton, we've invited a panel of Brown administrators to answer the various questions that you submitted in advance of and during this event. And once again, feel free to ask questions using the Q&A function below. But for now, let's begin with introductions. Panelists, in your introductions, please provide your name, your role at the university, and a few roles about what your role entails. For our first introduction, we have Dean Andrew Campbell.
Okay, thank you, Olabenga. Good afternoon or early evening, everyone. My name is Andrew Campbell, and as Dean of the Graduate School, I oversee all aspects of graduate education for doctoral, master's, and non-degree students in programs that are associated with 41 departments, centers, and institutes. That work really begins with admissions. It encompasses student academic and non-academic support, maintaining standards and qualities of excellence, and supporting students through to the degree. I want to point out that the work that we do is not done alone. It's done in partnership with folks across the university, and our key partner units are led by people on this panel. I do want to say I've had the pleasure of serving as your dean for the past 4.5 years. I've also been really fortunate and proud to have a long, unbroken 26.5-year tenure as a member of the Brown faculty, working with students, teaching students, and supporting students. And that's something I take a great deal of pride in. Now, in addition to sharing with you those things, what I do, I think it's really important to share with you why I do it. I believe education is an important gateway to success. For me, it's been an important gateway, and I think that's also true for all of you. So that's what I believe, it's what I've always said, and it's why I serve as your Dean of the Graduate School. And finally, let me just say thank you to the GSC for the outstanding leadership that they've really been providing to all of you students and for organizing this town hall. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Olabenga.
Thank you, Dean Campbell. Our next panelist is EVP Russell Carey.
Good evening. My name is Russell Carey. I'm Vice President for Planning and Policy. I oversee a number of administrative areas, including Community and Government Relations, the Department of Public Safety, and the Corporation Office. I think probably more relevant to tonight's conversation, I chair the core crisis team, and over the past 6 or 7 months have been overseeing the COVID-19 testing program and also chair the campus activity level review team related to the pandemic.
Shontay, Delalue, Vice President for Institutional Equity and Diversity, and I'm also serving in an interim role as Senior Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and the Division of Biomed. In my office in OIED, we have 2 major arms. One is strategic initiatives around diversity and inclusion, including oversight of the DAP process, and also compliance. That includes discrimination and harassment, bias, Title IX, as well as affirmative action and equal opportunity, and also the ADA Section 504 coordination. We do have, I want to just mention, a new staff member, Juana de los Santos, who's serving as our Director of Equal Opportunity and Diversity. And so I hope you all get to know her in the virtual space, but then in time, in person.
Great, thank you, VP Delalue. VP Estes.
Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Estes. I'm Vice President for Campus Life. I hope you are all healthy and well. It's great to be here with you all, and I'm really looking forward to our opportunity to be in discussion together. I'm in my 5th year at Brown. Campus Life is a large division, and it has a lot of the resources that support students, graduate students outside of the classroom, to something that Dean Campbell gestured to. We coordinate and collaborate quite a bit with many of the administrative units that are joining us with this conversation this evening and others to make sure that graduate students have the support that they need. And I'd also like to thank GSC for its role in moderating tonight's discussion and all the work that they do throughout the year. It's a pleasure in Campus Life to be able to work closely with GSC, Kat and Malcolm in particular. And so we have a really great sense of all the great work that they do and that you all do. So look forward to the discussion tonight.
Thank you. And finally, Provost Locke.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all, and thanks for taking the time to be on this Zoom meeting. Thanks also to Kat and Malcolm for terrific leadership and for moderating today's panel. I'm Rick Locke. I'm a professor of political science and international and public affairs here at Brown, and I also currently serve as provost. And at Brown, the provost is the chief academic officer, which means that I collaborate with the different deans of the schools, including Dean Campbell, to ensure academic excellence across the different departments. And the provost at Brown is also the chief budget officer. Which means that I collaborate with the administrative side of the house to make sure that we actually have the resources to support the excellent academic programs that we have on campus. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with you tonight, and thanks for the invitation.
And thanks for all those introductions, panelists. So to kick off our Q&A section, we've asked a couple of students who have submitted questions in advance to read their questions aloud for the panelists. Each student has agreed to read exactly one question aloud to be answered. So first we'll hear from Kathryn and Malcolm, then we'll hear from the 2 students, and then we'll launch into our live Q&A. But for our first question, I will now turn it over to Kathryn.
Thank you so much, Olubenga, and thank you to President Paxton for your brief update, and then also for the introductions of our great panelists. So this first question is directed at President Paxton, EVP Russell Carey, and VP Eric Estes. So as students submitted, Brown has made a decision to welcome more students back on campus in the spring, while continuing to limit their housing to single occupancy rooms and dorms. With the influx of undergraduates into the greater Providence community, it is evident that renting options near campus are becoming limited for graduate students, and it is becoming more expensive to rent in areas that are within walking distance to campus. How will Brown mitigate the issue of graduate students and the Providence community as a whole being displaced by the new wave of undergraduates who can no longer live in the residence halls?
Thank you, Kat. I'll take that first. Yeah, so last week we announced a plan for the spring that means bringing more students back to campus if the health conditions permit, and that's really important. Where the number of first year, second year, third year, fourth year who can live in dorms is limited to this single occupancy. We don't want to have doubles. I think that wouldn't be good for a number of reasons. I actually don't think that we'll have that much more pressure on off-campus apartments. Sophomores are not allowed to live off campus, and the vast majority of juniors and seniors who would live off campus are already here and already are living off campus. So I don't think this spring is going to get substantially worse. I think that there is a broader issue, which is, as the university has grown and hasn't built new dorms, we haven't built a new dorm for over 30 years. It has moved more undergraduates into the community, and the graduate school has also grown. So there's increasing housing pressure. We're building one dorm now. It's going to open in May, which is great. And we are hopefully going to be starting on another 2 dorms before too long. So that, this is one way to really say, look, we want to have first year, second years, and juniors all living on campus, and then any senior who wants to live on campus, and that'll help. We also have had a lot of discussions about what we can do on graduate student housing, and we're not quite at a decision on that, but I think it's something that we really need to address.
Well, President Paxton, I think you hit the major points. I think in the short term, there shouldn't be much difference between right now and spring in terms of off-campus undergraduate population, although there are more undergraduates this fall off campus than in a typical fall. And I think the point about thinking about the longer term solution being the building of additional undergraduate housing. President Paxton, to your point, the last time Brown built new undergraduate housing was the year I graduated from college. So that gives you some perspective on just how long ago it was. And I know I spent my first year here working with you and others to really make the case that we should build more undergraduate housing. And I think, opening of health and wellness this coming fall of 21 will start to help ease up some of the squeeze off campus, around campus in terms of the housing market. So I'm really looking forward to health and wellness opening and I think also provide, really great housing on campus for undergraduates that they will want to live in.
One thing I would add, I think, just to amplify one point, is so even in this fall where we have more students living off campus, it's not dramatically higher. It's a couple hundred, which makes an impact, but just to be clear, it's not twice as many as we might have had in another year. And the other thing is people probably may be aware of this, but we've leased a number of what would typically be off-campus apartments that we're managing as residence halls, and we're adding more of those in the spring to again try and help mitigate some of the impact of what we have to do to manage housing in the pandemic.
The current appointment extension for graduate students affected by COVID forces us into a constant state of precarity. Everyone is affected by this global pandemic. Why not guarantee an additional year of funding for graduate students years 4 through 6? This question is directed toward Provost Locke and Dean Campbell.
Yeah, so students in years 4 through 6 are the students who qualify to apply for extensions. I should point out that some students seeking extended support are actually seeking less than a year, which means that there isn't always a need for a full year's worth of extension. I think considering what length of support is needed makes more sense than automatically across the board saying that all students will need 1 year's worth of extension. And I think that's really important to really think about. We have a process. I think we need a process. And I think, as you all know, we have a committee. We have a committee that the COVID-19 Appointment Extension Committee, and that committee is made up of graduate students, faculty, and administrators. And they've worked very hard and diligently to really develop what's a really robust process. So the process we have in place has really benefited from input from all of the constituencies, faculty advisors to students, students themselves, and also administrators. And so I think thinking about what extension should look like should go beyond an automatic 1 year worth of extension. And I hope, Malcolm, that sort of begins to address your question, and I'm going to let the provost add or elaborate.
Thank you, Malcolm, for the question. And let me just add a little bit. The first one is to acknowledge that, of course, there's so much uncertainty going on right now for the graduate students. I mean, the pandemic, the economic crisis, the political climate that we've been living in, the racial justice movement, which I think is positive, that is impacting so many all at the same time. And I think you're absolutely right that anything that the university can do to try to mitigate that uncertainty is something that we should do. And so let me just be clear about what the university has done. We have made a commitment to all advanced graduate students, years 4 through 6, that we will provide an additional year of support if you need it. That's clear. So that is a commitment. Everyone who needs it has it, and that we sent in writing earlier in the academic year as we began to realize the impact of the pandemic and what was having on the research and progress of graduate students for a variety of reasons. What we also did, and this is what Dean Campbell was referring to, is we set up a process that's transparent and fair to allow students to apply for it. So the guarantee is there. And if we haven't communicated as clearly as we should be, we can do a better job at it, because that's there. So people should know it's there. And then the process that has been put in place is to basically make sure that we're matching people's needs with the resources. I hope people do feel reassured. The university really did want to come out early to provide that kind of support for graduate students.
And I think information has actually been provided in the chat for those of you who would like to read the process and the work of the committee.
Our next question is from Binish Pervez. Binish is a third-year PhD student in political science. Binish, please feel free to ask your question now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this panel, and I'm very excited to have you all here and answer our questions today. My specific question is related to international students at Brown, and as you've already alluded to, the past few months have seen multiple challenges to the immigration status of international students and workers in the US, including the most recently proposed DHS ruling, which can have a severe impact on our ability to stay and work effectively in the US. Beyond the current legal challenges that you have mentioned, how is Brown planning on providing continued long-term support for its international student community to tackle all aspects of these challenges, including those related to immigration, academic performance, mental health, financial burden, all of which is resulting from the damage that has been done to the political climate over the past 4 years? So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Let me just start with a few words, and then some of my colleagues will know more about the details. But it's such an important point that you're raising, and the last years have been really, really stressful for our international students and for the university, because you're really important to everything that we do. I am somewhat optimistic that things are going to get better soon, so that's really good. And making sure that you have access to the resources that you need to get your visas, stay in the country, and get the mental health support that you might need is something that we've also done a lot of work on. So I'll let my colleagues say more, but thank you for raising the issue. It's vitally important. I don't know who, do you think Eric or Eric Estes or Rick Locke, who's the best person to pick up the details?
Maybe I can just add a little bit. First of all, nice to hear your voice, Binish. I hope you're well. You're absolutely right. The last several years, and it really accelerated in the last several months, have been really terrible for our international community, both our students, but also international staff and faculty and scholars. It's just been sort of incoming, constant, undermining our ability to be a open, global, cosmopolitan university. It's not just impacted Brown, it's impacted higher education throughout the country. So what have we done? And President Paxton already referred to some of this in her early remarks. First is, whenever possible, we have objected through our associations or working with our congressional delegations, et cetera, and fought against these policies, signing on to amicus briefs, working with our delegation to object to this legislation, and things like that. Actually, and it's not just to try to fight against what we think is wrong-headed policy and completely contrary to our values, but also to signal, to message publicly that we don't agree with these policies, that we support our international community. So that's one thing that we did. The second thing is working with our offices, Global Brown, OISSS. We've tried to hold, workshops for information sharing, information around visas, supporting our students, and including working and providing access to international lawyers, Gross Associates and Company, to make sure that our international community have the kind of support that we can provide. We have also been working, and I'm sure Eric Estes can speak more about this, but to make sure that we have the student support services, CAP services and other kinds of services, because we know that even if some of these government decisions are being challenged and haven't been implemented, but the weight of that on people as they're trying to navigate and do their work on top of everything else that we're going through, we know is an additional burden, and we're trying to support students with that. And with financial need, aside from the emergency EGAP funds that we provide and that we will continue to provide, if there are any additional needs that students need, and this is, we're working with Kat and Malcolm, and the GSC has been so important, we're very receptive to trying to help where we can, because we know that these are really, really difficult times, that the current administration, fortunately only around for 70 more days, has been brutal when it comes to international students and scholars, and we will do everything that we can to support you.
Yeah, if I can just add something. So thank you, Provost Locke and President Paxton. I think this is a really, really important issue. I think you all know that international students make up a significant portion of our graduate student population. So their value and impact is quite extensive in terms of what we do on campus. Let me just also acknowledge Assistant Provost Asabi Paloma in the Office of Global Engagement, who is really an important partner and one of the key point people we work with when we try to support all international students. Global Brown collaborates regularly, obviously, with OISSS in hosting a number of events that really are there to support international students to answer important questions. These are webinars. The availability of legal advice, as the provost has pointed out. These are all important things that we do at all levels. I also want to mention that the president has also been a very, very strong advocate. She's spoken a number of times about the importance of international students. She has acted positively in support of DACA. She's spoken against travel bans. She mentioned at the beginning, signing on to a number of amicus briefs. And just an exhaustive list in terms of the things that she's been involved in advocating for international students. Most recently, she's been appointed chair of the board of the Association of American Universities. And I think from that position, she's going to lead America's top 64 universities as we address federal policies affecting higher education. I think she'll discuss with lawmakers and take position positive policy stances that will really help to demonstrate and show the value of international students in our community. As the provost says, more locally, we have CAPS support available to our students. The Associate Dean for Student Support in the Graduate School is available for support to students. And again, we have financial resources to support students who have to contend with issues related to finances, emergency funding through U funds. And finally, as the provost says, we're looking at a change in administration. Past visa rulings by the current administration in Washington really haven't been favorable to international students and scholars. I think with the conclusion of the US elections, I think we can be much, much more hopeful going forward. I think with the new administration, we hopefully can return to some of the practices of the past, which really shows a value and recognition of the contributions of international students and scholars to the US higher education and US workforce. So there are a number of things, and I hope this provides you with some comfort that the university is really making efforts at many levels and are deeply committed to supporting international students.
Thank you. Let me just weigh in with just two more points that I think are important, but quite different from each other. We've talked a lot about policies and how we try to affect policy, and that's all really important. The other thing that we've seen is just tremendous xenophobia coming out of the White House, and that's not evenly distributed across different types of international students. Chinese students, Muslim students, students from Muslim countries have really faced just some horrible circumstances. So that's where the mental health supports and other things come in. But I just want, if any students are listening, this is something that we strongly object to, and we want to support you. The other point that's the more optimistic point is, I do, as the Dean mentioned, I'm involved in advocacy. I talk to a lot of people in Congress on both sides of the aisle. And my sense is that the the support for international students and scholars and for the support for international people staying and working in the United States is actually very strong in Congress. It's strong in the business community. It's certainly strong among universities. The roadblock has really been the White House, and that should change. So I'm quite optimistic about the future.
Beanish, I just want to thank you for, and I think you see it reflected in our answers, raising the concern around the mental and emotional well-being of graduate students. And I know Provost Locke and Dean Campbell talked a little bit about CAPS, counseling and psychological services. I just wanted to add a couple of other thoughts in that area. Not that long ago, a number of years ago, it was a 14-day wait to get an appointment, and there were wait lists. Graduate students, all students are now able to get an appointment within a couple of days. So access has improved dramatically. I know that in the past, there's been concern about the diversity of the staff, the therapists in CAPS. At the beginning of this semester, 81% of the therapists in CAPS were therapists of color. And I think greater diversity of their identities and backgrounds and experiences and histories and has enabled them really to be able to provide a much better support for an increasingly diverse graduate student population, graduate student body. And if you look at the access data, students of color, graduate students of color, international graduate students are overrepresented in terms of their percentage of the population in terms of who accesses CAPS. And I think that's a good thing. I think that speaks to the fact that students are making their way there to get support. And then the last thing I'd share is, in collaboration with the graduate school and with GSC's leadership, CAPS and Campus Life are piloting for the first time this semester a dedicated therapist for graduate students, something that I know has been very important in conversation with many people. And so we're really excited about that. And we're really excited about evaluating how that works this semester and thinking about how we can build on that moving forward.
Our next question is from Alistair Tulloch. Alistair is a sixth-year PhD student in neuroscience. Alistair, please feel free to ask your question now.
Great, thank you, and it's good to see and hear everybody. So the Graduate Student Council and the Graduate School have advocated for a legitimate graduate center for many years now to better align Brown with all of our Ivy peers who have such centers. So considering the social and professional benefits of a center for Brown graduate students, what are the short and long-term plans that will make a graduate center possible?
Thanks, Alistair, for the question, and nice to hear your voice. We, before the pandemic, had started a planning process, which I think you are well aware of, Alistair, to look at what we could do in terms of a graduate center that would also be linked to possible graduate housing. And this ties to the first question that was raised around housing. The amount of housing that the university-owned housing or controlled housing that the university offers to graduate students is inadequate, and we know that. And especially when we compare to our peers, we're not as accommodating in terms of our housing and being able to create a community for our graduates as we want to be. So we had last year, under the leadership of Vice President John Leopold, started a study to look at how could we actually maybe build a new dorm, or maybe even a couple dorms, so that we could have high quality, safe, affordable housing for our graduate students. And the idea would be that maybe in at least one of those spaces, we could actually have a graduate center. So it would be close to the housing, it would be centrally located, and it could serve for that. Now with the pandemic, everything got, as you know, we had to pull back on a lot of our capital planning. We sort of shut down projects, we delayed projects, et cetera, just because of the economic consequences of the pandemic. It is my great hope that as we begin to emerge from the fog of this pandemic, we will go back to that project, because I 100% agree with you. We need high quality, affordable housing for our graduate students, and we need a center that could bring the graduate students together so that you could do the important work you're doing much better than the basement room that you have in the grad center. We recognize what the limitations are of that space, and my hope hope had been that we would have been further along in that project, and then everything got derailed. As we emerge from this pandemic, my hope is that this will be one of the top priorities going forward. But I'm sure others could probably speak to that as well.
Yeah, so I just want to echo what the provost has said. And Alice, to your right, the graduate school was really been advocating for a centralized, dedicated space for graduate students on campus. And that's important to us because it's a very important part of student identity and being part of a community. Again, echoing what the provost really says, I mean, we're feeling pressures right now. And some priorities, unfortunately, have to change. And for me, one of the highest priorities is to make sure that we can support the students, mainly through extended support over the next few years. But this is something that we will keep at and remain active and work to bring to the campus for graduate students.
Great. Thank you, Provost Locke and Dean Campbell, for your answers. And also thank you to our 2 students who elected to ask live questions for today's town hall. We greatly appreciate it. So now we're moving on to our live Q&A session from pre-submitted questions and then also submitted questions within the Q&A bank here during the actual event. So the first question states, many graduate students believe that opening the campus creates certain equity concerns and it places profits over the health of people. What would you say to this concern and to those graduate students who feel this? I would like to direct this question towards VP Delalue, then also anyone else who would like to answer.
Thanks for the question. And let me be clear in my thoughts around how we see equity and experience as well as human life. It's critically important to us, the health and safety. I think since the start of the pandemic, the message has been from every leader who sent a message, every meeting, every town hall, is the safety of our community. I think that still stands. And we also know the value of education. The very value of the education will help people get into a place where they do have access to more in their lifetime, right? And so as an institution, we have to balance both of those things. We have to balance the health and safety of all of our community members with opportunity and access. And so striking a balance means having the institution open to afford people the opportunity to get that education while always putting health and safety first. And so it's not easy. I mean, none of us have ever experienced anything like this before. And so we will continue to make the type of decisions that put everyone first while also maintaining the health and safety. I mean, I know some of our graduate students, and then I'll turn it over, are parents. So I think about it in the same way. I have a child who's going to school every single day, right? It's a choice that a very tough choice I had to make as a parent, to send my child to school in the middle of a pandemic. But I feel like that's the best thing that he will need. He needs his education. And so, we don't take this lightly. And we'll continue to do what's in the best interest of our constituents, whether it be students, faculty, and staff.
Let me just maybe add to Vice President Delalue's comments about this, which is absolutely the very first principle and value that has guided all of our decisions is the health and safety of our community, everyone. And that's why the university has spent millions and millions of dollars on the testing, on retrofitting classrooms, PPE, and a variety of other things. And the reason that we chose to reopen was not for economic reasons, because reopening actually costs us a lot more money than not reopening. We did it because we think that the value of the education that we offer is really important, and it's what not only our students, but our society needs. And especially, we know that our most high need students are the ones who benefit by reopening. Those were the students who stayed on campus when we were ramping down in the spring, stayed on campus in the summer, were the first to be welcomed back in the fall, because as we know, engaging this way through Zoom also has a very differential impact on people depending on their home circumstances, availability to space, technology, quiet, et cetera. And what we heard from the students was we need to come back. And that was one of the very top priorities for us to bring the students back and to do it in a safe way. And that's why the de-densification plan was so important to everything that we did.
I would add one more thing. I agree with that. I mean, the equity issues are, in educational equity are really important. And I think that's one thing we've learned from this pandemic. The other thing that I thought was an important principle was to give people maximal choice.
Yeah.
So, if you don't want to teach in person, you don't have to teach in person. If you don't want to come back to campus, you don't have to come back to campus. And that way, people who have health concerns, or they're just more risk averse, or they live with people who are at higher risk of bad consequences of COVID, can take the precautions that they need to take. And that's worked pretty well. We'll see how many people opt to come back in the spring. I expect, depending on how the pandemic goes, we could get some melt in those numbers. And of course, we made in August, right? We announced a plan, and then in August, I know a lot of students were really unhappy. We changed the plan. And I think people have to realize that we can't predict the future, and we will change if we need to in response to the health conditions. It's just the right thing to do.
Thank you. The next question comes from the live Q&A. For graduating master's students who are graduating soon, I'm assuming as soon as in the spring, will there be a process to extend their health insurance for a few months until they've secured another insurance coverage? This especially pertains to international master's students.
That's a really good question that I don't think I've heard before. So I don't have an answer to it right now, but it's an issue that we should talk about. Anybody else heard of?
Well, last summer, we did move to extend health insurance for students as they were graduating in the pandemic. And it seems to me that was absolutely the right thing to do, and that we should continue that option for graduating master's students as well.
We can extend that an additional 3 months. You're right, Chris. This is the first time we've heard that from master's students, but it's something that we can do.
But we have the precedent, and we can just sort of follow the precedent of what we did last year.
No, thank you. Thank you all for answering that question. Our next question comes from another graduate student. After the events following the death of George Floyd, the death of Breonna Taylor, and concerns around policing, how can you ensure the safety of Black and Brown students on Brown's campus moving forward? Is there a plan to restructure the Department of Public Safety, or DPS? And is there a plan to disarm DPS so Black and Brown students feel safe on campus?
So let me take that, because I raised this in my remarks at the beginning. And the answer is no, there aren't plans yet, because we want to have a really good conversation with the community. And I think there's two sides to this: helping people really understand how DPS works, what it does, what its history is, and then also having conversations about what we as a community envision public safety to look like. I think it's the perfect time to have a conversation. It's a necessary conversation, but I don't want to predetermine the outcome of that conversation before we have it. So to the person who asked that question, please come to the November 18th BUCC meeting, and please come to the discussions and forums and focus groups that we're going to have in the spring. Now, all of that said, there are some changes that we will make that are probably more relevant to undergraduate students that will be announced at the first BUCC meeting on November 18th, because we've heard from students about a lot of concerns. We can make changes that are obvious before we get through this whole process. So we're prepared to take action if it seems like the right thing to do. But again, I think we really need to have that conversation with the community.
I was just going to add to the first part of that question about the safety for Black and Brown students. Again, that's of utmost importance to us. And so I will hope that students feel comfortable having some point of contact, whether it be a dean in the graduate school, my colleagues there I know who have open door policies, willing to address any concerns, hear concerns first and foremost, and then get students connected to resources as soon as possible. My office serves in the role of processing any bias reports. And so students should feel free to submit bias reports through our system. Also, if something rises to the level of discrimination and harassment, we do have 2 in-house investigators on our staff who address those issues. And that all sounds very systematic and transactional, but we do take into consideration the full impact on the person. I always say this, other students who know me probably have heard me say this, Brown is the microcosm of the United States. And what that means is that we are not free from issues on our own campus. And so we recognize that they are real. And what we've been talking about in this kind of centering Blackness is first and foremost, believe Black people. And so what I will hope is that if Black and Brown students are having a particular experience, that you do have at least one person on campus in the administration that you feel supports you, will listen to you, and affirm your experience. And then, of course, get you connected to resources on campus.
Yeah, I should say, so thank you, Shontay. I should also say, to students, this is an issue that I'm particularly sensitive to, and I'm really mindful to what students may be feeling and experiencing. So, we should rest assured that it's something that I'm paying attention to, that I will work with the administration because my suspicion is that your concerns and experiences may be very similar to what I felt while you were a student. So I'm aware of these concerns, and it's something that's on my radar. So please feel comfortable coming to see me or other deans in the graduate school.
Student asked, has the university decided on a COVID-19 positivity threshold for a virtual undergraduate spring semester? The current trends are disturbing, and bringing undergraduates back to campus may be risky if trends continue. I'll direct this question towards EVP Carey.
Let me start, and I'll probably be echoing some of the things that President Paxton and other people have said already. So there's not a specific threshold. And I'd say one thing just generally is there's a holistic review of both a variety of data and the sort of experiences on campus, what's happening around us locally and regionally, guidance from the state in particular, and the Rhode Island Department of Health. So, and we look at all those things on a daily basis, and a lot of what we look at is captured in the dashboard that was mentioned earlier, and the factors are described in the Healthy Brown website. As President Paxton said earlier, I think we can't predict where we'll be January 9th. So I think, it would be premature. I couldn't do anything other than speculate about where we'll be 2 months from now. I can say that right now, while we're seeing an increase in positivity on campus, in both the asymptomatic testing program that people are participating in and the number of symptomatic positive cases through health services, those positive rates are far lower than what is happening in the state. Now, there's probably a wide variety of reasons for that, but I think while we're concerned about the trend, the numbers are not large, frankly, and not what we're seeing at some peer institutions. And we're not seeing spread on campus between groups. We're not seeing spread from particular events, and we're certainly not seeing it from the in-person classes that have been taking place now for just about almost not quite 2 months, but close to it. So, I think that we feel like with the testing program we have in place, and the guidelines that we put in place, and most importantly, the fact that for the most part, community members have been following those guidelines really carefully, we are able to manage the campus activities that we have now and do so in a safe way. Obviously, as we look forward to the January with a larger population and likely more indoor activities and people being indoors more than we've had this fall, those present new challenges. But I think given everything we've learned and looking forward to that time period, I think, again, we think that we can manage that safely as well. We just obviously can't predict exactly how things will go. And we're prepared to, as President Paxton said earlier, change course in small or large ways as we need to based on what's happening in the public health situation.
The Rhode Island Department of Health has updated their guidelines for asymptomatic COVID-19 testing to include high contact workers in healthcare, as well as those ages 18 to 39. Why are third and fourth year medical students not being tested regularly given these updates?
You know, we had a lot of discussion about this. The third and fourth year medical students they're in clinics, they're in the hospitals, they're working with the other healthcare professionals in the state. And you know, the med school had a lot of discussion about this with our partners in the health system and concluded that it really made the most sense for our medical students to be treated exactly the same way as all of the other healthcare workers they're working with. So that was the decision. Now, you know, I didn't know about these recent changes in guidelines. If anything changes and the med school decides that it makes more sense to include third and fourth year medical students in Brown's testing program, I think we'd be very open to that. We want to do what's best for our students and what makes most sense.
And just to add on this, I mean, just for the testing that we've rolled out, we're not rationing that testing. Anyone who wants to be tested, if wants to be tested more often, that's an option for people. We're making sure that we can keep our community safe.
Maybe I could add a couple other comments to it. So the guidance that was referenced it's going to overlap. Guidance overlaps in general. There are going to be people who are in an 18 to 39-year-old age group who are third and fourth year medical students. But there's also CDC guidance that healthcare providers shouldn't be asymptomatically tested on a routine basis. So, you know, one of the things that we've often had to do during this time period is assess competing guidance, sometimes from the state and the federal government, and also differences of opinion among medical professionals. And this is a good example of one where there's been a lot of collaborative discussion. The Dean of Medical Education is an infectious disease expert. We have a lot of faculty who obviously have deep expertise in these areas, and that's guided a lot of our decisions as well. I can say that this is one that continues to be reviewed and discussed, and I know there's a lot of input and feedback from medical students about it happening right now. And we have made changes as we've gone along, and that could still happen here too. But I just would emphasize that was a careful and deliberative decision guided by medical expertise.
Yes, and not as the provost suggested, influenced by any considerations of cost or anything like that.
The next question comes from the Q&A. Will the 2021-2022 academic calendar have the same early April 1st deadline to file our dissertations and MA theses? We'll direct this question towards Dean Campbell and Provost Locke, possibly.
So maybe I can start off with that. I mean, we still haven't, done the planning for what next academic year is like. But I think that the core assumption is that we are going back to our traditional 2-semester academic year that has the traditional deadlines for filing of theses, et cetera. This year, everything was extraordinary. We had to squeeze in a third semester so that we could run a safe, de-densified academic year, residential academic year for the undergraduate students. And that's what changed a lot of things. It's my great hope, our great hope, that especially now that it looks like a vaccine may be on its way, that we'll be able to run the traditional academic year as we always have next year.
Yeah, so let me just say I agree with the provost. Our expectation is that we will keep that calendar. We will try to return to normal as much as possible. And so this is what we're shooting for. Again, he pointed out that last year was an unusual year. It was a year where we were reacting, didn't know how things would look, what our timeline would look like. And I think now we're in a position where we can look carefully and think about what the end of the semester will look like. And we're planning to return to our normal schedule when it comes to filing, submission, et cetera. And I think we have sufficient time ahead of us that if we do need to make a course correction, we can do so with sufficient time.
I noticed that there's another question in the Q&A that's very closely related. So maybe we could just take it right now, where somebody's saying, given that a spring graduation ceremony seems implausible, is there any chance that the deadline for dissertation defense can be changed to May 1st, like in most years, rather than April 1st this year for graduating PhD students. And I think the issue here is degrees are formally awarded by the corporation, which will meet earlier than usual this year because, whether there's a ceremony or not, degrees get conferred shortly after students complete their courses. The one thing that is important to note, though, is that several years ago, we shifted from having only one degree date per year for graduate students to having 3. So now corporation will confer degrees in the early May meeting or late May meeting, depending on the pandemic, the October meeting and the February meeting. So if you're a little bit late, you don't have to wait long to get there. Did I get all that right, Dean Campbell?
Yes, you did. And, thinking about international students and other students who are graduating and need some documentation that they are graduating, we can make it clear that they have completed all the requirements of the degree. And we have an October and a February degree award date. So those who may have missed for one reason or another the normal deadline for a May graduation week and convey information that this is an individual who completed all of the requirements for the degree. And that will just formally be awarded in October if need be. We've done that already in the past year.
So our next question involves the student unionization. So SUGSI, or our union formerly known as SUGSI, now known as GLOW, or the Graduate Labor Organization, advocated for $400 in COVID relief for graduate students. And so a student wants to ask for why are graduate students in the bargaining unit the only students receiving the $400 COVID relief when all students are affected by COVID and are financially struggling? I direct this question towards Provost Locke and Dean Campbell.
So I have to admit that I wasn't aware that only students who are members of GLOW were receiving a COVID relief payment. So that's news to me. Is that the case, Andrew?
It sounds like I believe it is the case, and the reason for that it's I don't have a good answer for that, but we certainly will find out what the basis of that is.
Yes, I believe that we were informed that students who are only in the bargaining unit,
yes, they will get that payment, and so that's a requirement for seeing that $400 payment. But the basis of making that decision, it's not a decision we made, but as a member of the bargaining unit, you do see that $400 payment.
Yeah, that's news to me.
Great. Thank you, Provost Locke and Dean Campbell.
Student rights. Taking a medical leave is not a financial option for many graduate students, especially graduate students from low-income backgrounds without a family support network. The new transitional stipend-like grant for those taking medical leave is a wonderful start, but doesn't make a dent in the kind of support someone might need who cannot work for an extended period of time due to mental or physical health issues. How is the university working toward offering a full year of medical leave support for students in need?
Yeah, so in terms of medical leaves, a full year of support, full year of medical leave is a very, very difficult thing for an international student to take and remain in the country and to retain their visa. So that's something that we really can't do. If a student needs to take a medical leave, it's important that they take that medical leave for health reasons. But again, without being enrolled, that jeopardizes visa status. What we can do is we can work with students to make sure that they have the time that they need to manage medical issues. Sometimes these don't require a student to be gone an entire semester. So there are ways that we can actually begin to think about supporting short-term needs to address medical issues while the student can remain an enrolled student, still receive the support, the financial support that they need and access university resources. But it is a challenge. If there is a need to take an extended leave, a student has to take that leave, and it's difficult for the graduate student for the graduate school to pay a student who is not an enrolled student. So We're trying to determine how much of a leave a student really needs to address medical issues. If it's less than a semester, we certainly will work with those students, provide the kind of support that they need and to help them remain enrolled. And again, this is particularly important for international students, but also domestic students.
This is for a student with students now working remotely from their homes. Is there any financial assistance for graduate students regarding the higher cost of electricity and gas due to this remote working?
So first of all, let me just say that the university really continues to be very committed to supporting all students, and the university has made sure that students receive stipend increases this year. This is something that we worked very hard to ensure, because there's concern that there would be emergent needs, thinking about what we were doing in terms of facing COVID. So a stipend increase is something that students have seen this year, where others have not seen an increase in pay. And so hopefully that increase will help to offset some of the costs students face. I will also say that we've also been working with the GSC to really think about some pressure points that students may be experiencing. And so with the GSC, we've developed a series of initiatives, as you know, Kathryn. We think about creating Produce in the Park program, which is to really increase food availability, affordability, and access. And that helps to relieve some financial pressures that students have. And so if we can relieve some financial pressures in some areas, we think it hopefully will create capacities for students to deal with expenses in other areas. At the same time, I do want to let students know that they can apply for emergency funding if these things become burdensome.
How is Brown ensuring equity and inclusion in the admission process for those applying for graduate programs in the coming academic year, especially for those who are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic? I can direct this one towards Dean Campbell, President Paxton, and also Provost Locke, whoever would like to answer.
So yeah, that's an interesting question. As you know, we have a number of programs that are that have paused admissions, and some programs that are continuing with admissions. And this is what we're doing, is that we really want to make sure that we focus on the students who are here. We want to make sure that there's no attrition. We want to make sure that we provide our current students the support that they need to make sure that they cross the line, that they finish with their training. For the programs that have where we've paused admissions, that's really related to opportunities as students think about graduating. We have some current students who have really been impacted by COVID, where the job market has really collapsed, and so they're not able to move on in the way that they normally would have in a normal job market. So we need to take the time to support those students a little more. And while we won't be admitting new students in those programs, and one might imagine that this might disadvantage HUG students in applying to those programs, it does give us time to really work on increasing support programming for HUGs and other disadvantaged students who are in that program, and to prepare that program for new students. So while we may not be bringing in new HUG students, we are strengthening the environment that those students are coming into. Now, on the other side, we have programs that are continuing to admit students into their graduate programs. And that's really because these students, the job market has not contracted as much. And so if the job market has not contracted as much, it means that we can still continue to admit a diverse cohort of students into those programs. So, it's sort of two different answers that I think addresses the concern. One, we really have to respond to the needs of current students who really cannot move on, which means that obviously we can't admit new HUG students, but it doesn't mean that we cannot focus efforts on making climate and the environment better for those students. And in those programs where we can admit, we are making a commitment, given what's happening with Black Lives Matter. We're asking those programs to think about what it is that we can do to improve access and opportunity for HUG students, particularly Black students, in those programs.
I would just add one thing which is related but slightly different. I'm not sure whether the questioner had this in mind, but people's applications, in the case where we are taking in graduate students, we know that their applications are going to look different. They may have had to take courses pass-fail during COVID. They may have, been affected, their academic records. They may not be able to take standardized tests because they're not being offered in some parts of the country. So if you actually go to the graduate school website and you look at sort of extenuating circumstances and COVID things, we're really going to work hard this year and in future years to make sure that we take into account the experience that students have had as undergraduates during this pandemic, and not make sure, not let it be that really fantastic applicants are disadvantaged because of just the vagaries of this pandemic.
Yeah, and if I can just add to this, it's true that in some of our PhD programs, we've paused admissions for the reasons that Dean Campbell mentioned, that we want to support existing students, etc. For others, we are still open for admissions. And we are committed as a university to continue the excellent work that Dean Campbell and Assistant Dean Marlena Duncan have done in recent years, and really successfully recruiting wonderful students to campus. And that's going to continue to happen. We've done a bunch of things. We've already sort of gone test optional for GREs across almost all of the fields. We've been working with the different programs to have a more holistic admissions process. We have gone out and tried to recruit and communicate to low-income and HUG students that this is a good place to come for graduate education. And all of, just to be honest, are we doing everything we can, or do we always get it right to support the students once they're here? No. We try. We don't always get it right. You have wonderful leadership in GSE and Kat and Malcolm advocating, and we're slow at times, but we finally catch on and listen and adapt. And that is the commitment that I think Dean Campbell was talking about. We know we have a lot of work to do, and we will continue to do it so that Brown is seen, and it actually is a welcoming place for people to be trained for their graduate education.
So if I can just go back, thank you, Rick. So if I can just go back to what President Paxton said regarding the GREs, a number of the programs that are still admitting for this year or for the upcoming year, a lot of those have waived the GRE as a requirement, recognizing that there isn't really much predictive value in that in terms of how a student actually performs. There are a few who have held on to the GRE, but they understand this year some of the challenges that students face, whether these students are domestic or international students. They recognize that, and there's a willingness, and they will waive the requirement for the GREs. So those are important things. And we also have this message on our graduate school website. We also remind applicants that we will look very carefully at their applications as it comes in, and understand the challenges that those who are required to submit GREs might have, and we'll waive those. And we'll also give consideration to what grades they may have in their final year. And again, looking at their applications holistically.
And I just want to add, not about this, but and I know we're running out of time. I did write to Ethan Bernstein in the graduate school about that supplement related to COVID. And what I just learned is that that's available to all graduate students in the bargaining unit. And if you're in the bargaining unit, then your TA, RA, et cetera, you're covered in the bargaining unit. So please reach out to the grad school to get clarification and access those funds.
A student asked, what resources are available for students who require 2-week isolation / quarantine? Specifically, for example, food security, health services. I'll direct this question to VP Estes and possibly EVP Carey.
So what we would encourage students who are isolating or quarantining off campus to do is to contact health services, and that they can work with you along with colleagues in the graduate school and in other departments like student support services and campus life to make sure that you are in a position to be cared for in terms of your health needs and other needs. So we would want to work with you and make sure that you have access to what you need. And if you need support in doing so, that we're there to make sure that we can help make that happen. So I think health services is really the best place to start, although Maria Suarez in the graduate school, my colleagues in student support services, who she works very closely with, are also a good place to start if there are just general questions or concerns. But again, health services is working with all students, graduate students, medical school students, undergraduates, around their health needs during this period in time where we recognize students are going to need extra support, particularly those who are, in a situation where they might have to isolate or quarantine for a period of time.
So I think the message is don't be afraid to ask for help,
Exactly.
right? And health services is one place. There are other places. We're not going to let students who are isolating or quarantine go without food or medicine or things that they need. We're going to support you.
Yep.
Okay, I have one final question for tonight. So I know that navigating the pandemic and navigating the changes that COVID-19 presented there was no blueprint for this. We were all navigating something new. So what are some positive outcomes from the pandemic do you see being permanent in regard to graduate students?
There are a lot of things, and we're already over time. We could talk about this a long time, but there are positive things that we're learning through this pandemic. I've been kind of talking for years about wanting Brown to be a digital first organization, and suddenly we had to be, and we did. And, I think a lot of the tools for remote learning, remote teaching will actually turn out to be positive for graduate students, especially graduate students who have to do field work, who have to travel for their research. So I can see a lot of creative ways where what we've learned from this year, we can actually turn around and use to the benefit of our students going forward. So that's just one small thing that I think we've learned. The ability to kind of beam in scholars from all over the world to consult with graduate students about their research. This is something that never would have happened in the past, but it's easier to get people to come in and you kind of be part of our community than it's ever been before in a very ironic way. So there are positives here, and I'm sure my colleagues can think of others.
Yeah, if I could just add, Chris, I think in addition to the new technological capabilities that we've been able to develop over the last several months that allow us to connect with one another in different ways, et cetera, I would say that there's a couple cultural things that were really important. I think that at Brown, like in the country as a whole, we had, quote unquote, our own essential workers who are often not fully seen or valued. They came to work, they kept the place going, whether the cafeteria workers or the facilities workers or people in the back office. And we came to depend on them, see them, and value them in a way that in a hierarchical institution like the university, they may not have always been or felt seen. Now they are. And it's my great hope that going forward, they will be seen and valued by all of us going forward. I also think that in this weird world that we're living in, where we can see each other constantly, we can through Zoom, in my class that I'm teaching, I can see the people, eating breakfast, and at the same, so like the boundaries between what's private and professional get blurred, and it's very atomized. But we also saw that we really need each other as a community. There was a generosity of spirit and with one another, because everyone understood how stressed out people were, that I think emerged. And it's my great hope that that sort of generosity towards one another, that openness to one another, to seeing people who they authentically are, and not for the roles that they play or what their background or how they look or things like that. I'm hoping that that continues. And I guess the third thing is I'm very proud that the role, and this was under Chris Paxson's leadership, the role that Brown played in the community, providing thousands of meals to people who needed it, PPE for frontline workers, housing for frontline workers. When we vacated some of the dorms, people were nervous about going home after they were working. We housed them. We did a lot of things as an anchor institution in this community, and since then, real commitments towards children of Providence, education, healthcare, et cetera. those are all aligned with our values. And it's my great hope that going forward, even post-pandemic, we continue to play that leadership role in our community because the community needs it.
Yeah, I would say, you know, for me, it's the increase and better use of technology. And you think about the graduate school and the reach of the graduate school. I think having technology really allows us to really extend our reach and visibility, especially globally. You know, we're a very diverse international institution, and I think with technology, we really are now extending our reach, and I think that's something that'll stay with us. I think that's a real plus.
Great. Thank you so much for your beautiful answers. And so I would like to take the time to conclude tonight's event. I want to say thank you to our panelists, President Paxton, Dean Campbell, Executive Vice President, President Russell Carey, VP Shontay Delalue, VP Estes, and of course, Provost Locke, for taking the time out of your evening to answer all of the graduate student questions pre-submitted and live. Also want to give a special thank you to graduate students for taking the time out of your evenings to attend and ask your questions and really engage in a discussion with us. And lastly, I'd like to say a special thank you to Olubenga Joseph, and then also everyone behind the scenes in media services in helping put this event together. It really does take a village and a team to make these type of events happen. So thank you. I hope you guys have a great rest of your Thursday. Please look out for other GSC updates and events from all of our beautiful administration sitting here on the panel today. Thank you and have a great night.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone.